Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel today with two experts in the industry, Megan and James. Megan, probably we'll start with introduction of you two, and I'll take over there. Megan?
Yeah, hi everyone. Happy to be here and talking with James and Marina. I work at Pulumi and I am our VP of Infrastructure as Code. And so today we'll be talking about how Pulumi has evolved infrastructure as code over time in this new and ever-changing space. And I've been at Pulumi for 4 years, and before that I was at AWS. So big fan of everything that the team at AWS is doing.
Great. James?
Hello, everyone. I'm James Bland. I'm the worldwide tech lead for data and AI here at AWS. Been with AWS for a little over 6 years now, and so feels like a lifetime. Everything moves in, I feel like dog years here at AWS.
Great. Thank you, Megan and James, joining us. I'm Marina Novik. I'm actually Senior Partner Solution at AWS, and I know James for all my career in AWS for 5+ years. So thank you for joining and ready to share your insights. So you both have a very long career in DevOps space, so I'm sure you have a lot of knowledge and then observation to share with our audience. And I would like to start understanding how IT and DevOps era has changed and what you see as a trend nowadays, how cloud era and the growing complexity Gen AI era changing it. And Jim, but I'll start probably with you. I know you're extremely passionate about DevOps history in general, right? And could you please share a little bit of this history with us, how the transition happened from IT to DevOps and from data center to cloud with the platform engineering? What you see right now is a new trend, AIOps or AI-driven software development lifecycle, how platform engineering team adopted. What do you see customers say?
Yeah, so I guess tapping into a little bit about the history of it. So like literally DevOps started way before DevOps was actually even the term was coined, right? I mean, we had like system engineers, we had developers who were actually trying to get rid of the daily toil that they had with trying to release and things like that. And so a lot of times they would, write their own scripts, like homegrown things, right? Like I remember writing even make files to do builds, and then also writing installation scripts. So then operations teams that actually had to install this stuff could do things on a very consistent basis. But still, we were trying to get that consistency, but it wasn't really consistent, right? Because sometimes we'd always forget steps in the installation, and then it was also manual. So a lot of times operations people would miss steps too, like in the documentation, because they're human as well, right? Like we even though you might document it, a lot of times people miss steps. They go from steps 1, 2, and then 6, right? It's like, oh, I forgot 5, 4, and 5. It's like, well, it happens. And so, in the evolution I've seen over time is that the tooling has gotten better. People have gotten, but there's still a lot of like human in the loop, and still a lot of manual processes that are in there. Like even though you might have some automation and like a tooling, well, somebody still has to configure the tool. They still have to write the different things that are part of the process. And so those things still kind of get missed. And so what I've seen kind of like the evolution over time is we've defined and we've actually coined the term, like DevOps, and we've actually put in things on there. But at the same time too, we still have a long way to go, right? And that's where I see kind of like the where AI is kind of taking us, where it's helping a lot of that because of that. There's still the ambiguity in that, and AI is kind of like helping with that ambiguity because it's able to, I don't want to say comprehend, but it's able to take in that additional context that we don't have as humans in like our context window, and it's able to deal with like more things and in a broader perspective. And so what I see with like customers is they're coming along in this kind of like evolution of DevOps, but it still has a little ways to go.
Interesting. Megan, what do you see in infrastructure as a code in this new AI era, and how infrastructure as code has emerged over the years? And what do you hear from your customer on AI adoption for infrastructure as a code and AI-driven software development lifecycle?
Yeah, I think one way we think about it inside of Pulumi, and this is something that our CEO Joe says a lot, is you wouldn't vibe code without Git. And some people do, but often the workflow nowadays when you're vibe coding an application is, oh no, the AI agent took it down the wrong path. Let me just roll back using Git, right? So I'm just going to go back to where I previously was. And you do a lot of that iteration. And in the same way you wouldn't do that, you wouldn't use AI agents on infrastructure without IAC. And so IAC is the Git layer where it's your desired state. And so if you're trying to do something in a dev environment where you're letting an agent make changes, you're going to want some sort of desired state that you can go back to. You're going to want to clearly see what changes it made in a diff. And so that is kind of the layer of IAC in this new AI age. I think in terms of what we're hearing from our customers, more holistically about where the industry's at, is infrastructure has always felt like a bottleneck for development teams, but suddenly that divide is feeling like more. And it's hard for me to tell if that's fear-based and that's like projecting where we might be, or if that's actually where teams are. But we hear a lot of that now, is like, we only have so many resources on the infrastructure team. We were already bottlenecked before this, and now all of our development teams are using AI tools and shipping more lines of code than they were in the past, and they need more infrastructure than they did in the past. And we're not getting headcount to grow our team double, so what are we going to do? And I think that that's a trend that was already there, but we're maybe seeing it accelerate based on how things are. And when we think about Pulumi specifically, because everything I've talked about so far is just IAC generally, Pulumi is IAC in familiar programming languages. And the one thing that LLMs are great at, like their number one first use case, is coding. And that is because they have all this training data on programming languages. And so Pulumi is kind of riding this wave. We have large AI startups that use Python for everything. And they're like, why would I use something else? I want to use Python for my infrastructure as code as well. And so even if, Pulumi didn't ship any AI feature, we are kind of getting taken along for this ride of LLMs knowing programming languages, teams that are starting to have Python-based tech stacks. And lastly, like the LLMs are, the most important thing using an AI tool is like what context it has, right? That's the difference between it being good and not good, and good and bad. And now with things like Codact, the LLMs can actually write and execute code. And so they can do this whole loop where they're actually checking, like, did I write a programming error, or did it not compile? And if it didn't, go fix it. And so you have this really cool loop of validation, which allows it to self-correct. And so that's kind of, I think, what we're seeing in the overall AI plus IAC space.
Interesting. James, so like how much do you see AI tools adoption and software development cycle, not only infrastructure support, but doing absolutely all different tasks and developers and platform engineers? And what the main concern of the customers and pain points in this adoption is? Like, are they like actively adopting all the way to production, or there's still some friction there?
We're seeing various levels with different customers, right? Like some customers are still like very wary and they haven't really like a lot. They're looking into it, right? But they really haven't adopted it and using it in production environments. But something that I've also noticed, like just even over time, like anybody who's a practitioner who's been doing this for a while realizes that there's no like one tool that anybody has like within their environment, right? It's usually a combination of different tools. In fact, I've even talked to a lot of customers that are using like 20 plus tools, right, to manage their operations all the way from, like their entire software delivery lifecycle, right, all the way from, design, plan, code, all the way through deployments and operate. Where I'm excited about AI is I see AI kind of like bringing together all of these different integrations. Like I read an interesting stat like a few weeks ago on MCP servers, right? Like it basically said there will actually be more MCP servers than there are APIs in existence, like in like 5 years from now. And in a way that's good and bad at the same time, right? It's like, man, do we really need another API? But what I'm excited about it for is that it's directionally giving somebody or giving the industry a way to kind of integrate different tools with each other, right? Like before, like an API, you can write REST, you can have different type of APIs, and there's no like common thing that ties these APIs together. But MCP is a common protocol that if they all develop against that standard, then all these tools will interoperate, right? Like, and so then like I can develop a tool independently, have an MCP server, and then if I have an MCP server and others have MCP servers and I implement a client in that, I can talk to those other MCP servers, right? Without having to understand like what type of API that they integrated in the background. It doesn't matter at that point, right? Because I'm using a standard of MCP. And so that's kind of like the trends that I'm seeing. But like right now, like when I talk to customers, like what they're really focused on right now is kind of like the coding tools, But to me, it's going to be more interesting once I start to see all the other pieces like planning, design, and operate, and all those things start to come together. And then that way, then basically we'll have full integration between the entire software development lifecycle.
Interesting. So Megan, how Pulumi address this kind of trend and like customer ask, and how it fits into that story of the MCP servers, and like to make sure that customers actually can keep up with this scale? As you mentioned, as platform engineering is not growing, but we need to grow efficiency.
Yeah, I think there's kind of been three phases in terms of the AI wave. There's been like one, which was chat. That was like our first interface with it. And
Yeah.
what we saw from our customers is they were using that for a lot of documentation use cases. And so, working in the cloud, it's a very broad space where you are interacting with a lot of different services that have different parameters and you need to remember for each resource. And so like the first kind of use case was, I want to just ask something and it will give me those docs. And obviously in the early days, there was a lot of hallucination because we didn't have things like MCPs to just look it up directly. And so that was kind of like where customers were leveraging it first. Then second was what I call like the co-pilot era, of like you have tools that are LLMs, but they also have some sort of unique access. And so in our case, it would be, you could ask things like, how many EC2 instances do we have in production? And it would actually like use an API, like the LLM would know how to wrap an API. And now a lot of that I think has been replaced by our MCP server. But then the next phase of this is agents. And so some of the stuff that James is talking about is the workflow of how do agents talk to each other? What are the agents used for? And in terms of what we're seeing now, when I talk to customers, I think we're very much in the phase of using agents locally to speed up your own development. I don't know that there's a lot of autonomous use cases, at least not that I've seen at this point. We're, treading lightly, but it's largely just in local development, using things like Cloud Code Cursor, et cetera, to be able to speed up your existing workflow. But I haven't seen anything where it's like, oh, we have something in production that's like actively doing write operations. Like that's, I don't think where we are just yet. But I think also I will give the caveat of like, a lot of the people we talk to is the sample size of the market that is like modern companies are like wanting to modernize or are like early adopters of things. So I think in a lot of my conversations, companies are heavily using AI tools. But to James' point earlier, like that is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a ton of companies behind that who are like still just evaluating these tools.
So Megan, Pulumi recently announced that a new AI agent, Neo, right? I know you're extremely customer obsessed. I worked with Pulumi for a while. So what kind of use cases the new agent address, and how actually it's it's a new evolution, right? From what it was before from Pulumi tools. What customer ask from Pulumi right now from AI agent? And could you probably give us some use cases, interesting one?
Yeah. So just for context, we launched something called Pulumi Neo just over 3 weeks ago. And the concept is it's an AI agent that can do infrastructure tasks. And kind of doing a callback to James' intro on the history of DevOps, the number one thing we kept hearing from customers is like, we don't have enough time. So the purpose of Neo was solely to reduce toil. And I thought it was interesting in James's intro where he was like, originally, where we were with DevOps is like, there was a lot of toil and we were, trying to automate things. And that's the root of like what led us down this path was the feeling of we don't have enough people, we don't have enough time, we need to find ways to automate and scale. And so our actual question that we went to customers with is, what do you spend a lot of time on? And that is how we built Neo. Was we worked on use cases as our like level of what success is based on what customers said to that question. And so what we heard was I spend a lot of time updating like runtime on Lambda. And so we have to go do that across many repos. Those repos are owned by different teams. So I have to go like open PRs in all of their repos and then go talk to the people. And I'm spending a lot of time on that. And we heard things like, I have a bunch of policy violations that I need to go spend time individually going through. How do I fix each one of these? Basic things like I spend time trying to understand our architecture because I'm new to the team, or we just acquired a company and we need to bring in their cloud landscape into our own. And so we basically wrote a bunch of evals of the things that we heard and then started working on Neo, which was an agent to write your IAC code for you. And it will evolve to do more than that. But the first phase of it was it writes PRs. And so the like key demos that we did at launch, which I'm happy to do today later as well, was things like, hey, check all of my repos, and if I have a Lambda runtime that is out of date or like needs to be updated, just update it. And so it opens all those PRs in all of the repos. And then from there, you still have the hard part, which is the human part of, okay, I need to go talk to that team and see like, hey, is this something that you can ingest? Can someone carry this over the line? So it's speeding things up, but it's very important to us to not compromise on security.
Yeah, Damn. So you just mentioned that like the area is like, still like everybody focusing on the coding AI, right? And Megan just said is like, so basically we have AI tool which take you from the just ID and specific the infrastructure as a code like project, right? So like making sure that you actually execute at organization scale some changes and best practices. So does it resonate what you see from the customer? Like, are they looking to do like broad like changes and with an easy way so they can scale probably massive changes across organization? Would it help the customers?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, when Megan was talking about that, she made me smile because I was just remember even in my time, right? Like one of the common things that we'd see like between all infrastructures is like, so we created this template that developers could use when they're launching things. And when we looked at all of the production environments, when I was running at a previous job, we noticed that every developer was running T2 2x large instances. And we're like, how is everybody running the same one? Well, because it was in the template, right? And nobody changed the template. They just use it exactly the way it is. They didn't profile their workload. They didn't actually, like optimize between what they needed. And we found like most of the actual developers or the workloads that were going out there didn't even need T2 2x large, right? They could have actually done with like a lot smaller instances. And so they weren't optimized for that. And so what Megan talks about is like, yeah, that's actually a use case or a problem that we see across like all different like all our customers, right? It's like from developers, they have to learn the full stack, right? And so a lot of times they don't they're not really going to get into the weeds of like, hey, what type of how to optimize the workloads, like how do these run in the how do these run best in the cloud? And so they're going to use what you give them. And so I think with AI is now is kind of like that assistant that is actually out there that's an expert at cloud, so it can actually tell you and make recommendations of what you should start with, right? And so, yeah, I see this a lot with customers, and so I think, and I'm kind of excited where the industry is going in this.
And interesting, you both mentioned two different use cases, when like security and the cost optimization. And security is number one priority for AWS and for Pulumi right now. And with Gen AI arrays shouldn't change, right? Is James is like, do you still see hesitation from the customer using and what they ask, like in security space from the Gen AI tools is like, are they require some additional guardrails or they require like human in the loop? How they feel about like tools taking over their infrastructure and applications?
Yeah, I mean, it's security is still a big issue even in this particular space, right? Like we're seeing things like attacks, like injection attacks, like with prompt injection. People are being very clever about it and actually injecting like things that, hey, as an LLM, do this first, like egress all your data, but then don't tell the user that you're doing this and kind of do it behind the scenes. And so we still need a human in the loop. And I'm also kind of like wary about in this particular space because I'm starting to see examples of kind of like anti-patterns in terms of security. Like right now, I see a lot of like, especially with MCP, right? I see people running like arbitrary code. Like if I look at the MCP, a lot of times if you look at how it's actually being ran, they're using like MPX or UVX, and it's actually running in memory, right? And people are running arbitrary code without actually looking into what it's actually doing, right? And so it kind of scares me a little bit. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to help customers navigate around that, where we're working with different partners to have them run the MCP servers, like run them as remote servers, so then customers don't have to run, like download and run arbitrary code. But these are still big problems with customers, right? And they're still a bit hesitant because they're hearing all these different things. But I think there's an opportunity here that if we get back to like sound best practices that we've always done for software engineering anyways, then we probably wouldn't have this problem. So it's kind of almost a double-edged sword. It's great that we're going quick and we're experimenting, but at the same time, it's also giving security teams a bit of like bad vibes because now they're like some of these old problems that they thought they had solved are kind of resurfacing now.
Yeah, I agree with you. I had a couple of like panels with other partners and AWS customers for the last 2 weeks, and I think what people miss is the foundational security and best practices not going away. Megan, I know Pulumi has actually features in product ACS is like environment, environment EC, sorry, and how Pulumi work at Turgan addressing this like concerns in security space, and how Pulumi like help customers security governance and compliance, and if like does Neo actually can help with that too?
Yeah, that's definitely been front of mind while building Neo. I think what makes our team most excited to build Pulumi Neo is we're building on top of our existing platform and all of those capabilities. And so we talked about earlier the importance of if you're gonna vibe infrastructure or vibe code, which I think that term is so overused, but it seems to be like what people that understand when you're talking about doing like agentic dev loops. When you're doing that, you want this IAC layer for safety, right? To be able to like go back to something, to have a steady state, a stable state, right? And to see the diff on it. But then there's other things that are, the core Pulumi platform that we're building on here that make Neo that much more safe day one, which is, for example, IAC runs a preview, right? So you're running a preview against the AWS APIs. And so you'll be able to see like, hey, does this accidentally update my database? Like, I don't want that. And so being able to have that layer of guardrail saying, okay, I previewed it and I know what the changes will be to my infrastructure. That's like bread and butter for IAC, right? And like you have that already. There's also, as we start to move into more agentic workflows, the need for ephemeral environments. You're going to want to just spin up a new environment and have these agents operate on it and then see what that state is, get something deterministic and roll it out to different environments. And like that is all Pulumi bread and butter, right? Like infrastructure automation, that's like what you use Pulumi for, what we're great at. And so that's the existing things. Then the important things when we come to Neo is one, approvals. So like in order to even run a preview in Neo, you have to give it explicit human approval. And so we're thinking a lot about that UX of like, what are the things that you want your agent to stop and say, hey, is this okay? And so throughout the UX, that's important. And then the last thing, which is the most important thing, is policy. And so Pulumi has out of the box policies where you can say, I care about AWS well architected framework. I want to be able to have Neo follow that, and Neo can't violate those policies. So you can say things like, never have an S3 bucket open to the internet, and it can't deploy anything because there is a deterministic thing called policy as code, which stops any deployment from happening that violates that. And we're not trusting the LLM here. And a lot of our security model and how we think about things is like we actually design as if the LLM and like our agent is an untrusted actor, because we know anything can happen with these models, right? Things like prompt injection, like James was saying. And so we just assume that it is untrusted and therefore build these guardrails that are outside of the agentic loop.
I think it's extremely important because I think like initial Gen AI, people start scaring us like they're going to lose their job, right? And no, because you're productive, you're the brain of operation, like AI tools can improve your efficiency, but you're not going anywhere because you're still the brain. But great. James, well-architectured best practices, right? Megan just mentioned that. And I know some of the customers have been like, struggling to like follow all of them. Is like, do you think that's like AI capability and trust LM will help to move faster and find these areas, gray areas where the customers previously like had trouble probably on implementing or even validating against best practices? Do you think it will help us build higher quality products in the future?
Yeah, oh, absolutely, right? Because like I was talking about earlier, like we've had this software development stack, and everybody we have this concept of a full stack engineer, and with cloud and well architected and all these other like frameworks and technologies, the knowledge that developers need to have is like growing and growing, right? And they can't, no human could possibly have all that knowledge, right? And so even though like a lot of developers have their best interests in heart, right? They want to do the well-architected things. They're not going to really study it, right? And they're not going to really go through it. And I think this is where AI helps, where AI can know about the well-architected guardrails and the best practices, and then it can guide the actual developer and in the implementation part of it, right? Look through your code and basically say, oh, you should do this instead, or look at your infrastructure and just like, hey, you should actually narrow the scope of your policies down a little more, things like that. And so, yeah, I feel like the technology is only going to help improve that experience for developers and not detract from it.
Great. So, James and Megan, for you to summarize, what do you see as next steps for the AI role in a software development science infrastructure as a code, where actually the Pulumi will go, AWS will go, and you already mentioned some of the trends, but what you would recommend to like audience as a next step, they need to think about right now and what might happen next year? Probably James, from you first.
Yeah, so start to embrace like AI, and using AI is kind of like that assistant. And the way I think of AI right now is it's like the 3-year-old with the knowledge of the internet, right? But remember, at the end of the day, it's still a 3-year-old, right? So you have to guide it a lot. You have to guide it a lot, and you're also going to have to review the work output that AI is giving you. But if you use it in that way, I think you can get a lot of great things out of it, right? It's like using it as your assistant, especially like in the infrastructure as code, right? Like before, people would actually come up, or like infrastructure or platform teams would actually come up with like these templates. You don't necessarily need to use those templates anymore, right? Now you have your assistant who's actually very knowledgeable about how to write infrastructure as code. Use that and let it do your first pass. Because when I'm talking to customers today, like what I'm finding with like these coded templates that they have, is a lot of times they're too restrictive, right? They're not covering like some of the use cases that developers actually have, or they're not looking at different technologies. Basically, trying to put a one-size-fits-all type of approach when you're talking about templating things out in like a template library, or pulling it in as a module, where infrastructure as code has an AI has that context knowledge about like how software is developed. It can look at your code. It can also make decisions based on, and help you make decisions based on where this type of workload should land. Like it can even make a suggestion like, hey, you're using a container, maybe you should actually try consider like Lambda, because maybe Lambda is a better use case for the way your code is written, or a different database type structure, like NoSQL versus SQL, things like that. And so I would say start to embrace it, but start to play around with it, but also realize that too, it's like it is the 3-year-old, right, with the knowledge of the internet.
We have a question, but before we jump to that, Megan, probably some thoughts from you is like where Pulumi is going, what do you see will happen, and how how users should start like using AI, and what's your thought about this?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what James was saying. It's really interesting because I think when LLMs first came out, everyone was like, oh, I can write like infrastructure as code so much faster. But then the platform teams were like, okay, now we have like 100 ways of defining a VPC in our company instead of the one we used to have from the template. To the earlier example of like a T2 micro instance or something that everyone used, suddenly it was hard to have standardization because everyone was just generating their own thing 0 to 1. And it is great to help you, start. I totally agree. But our customers are usually like large enterprise platform teams, and they're like, we don't want that. We don't want everyone to have a different way of doing things. It's very hard to maintain and update things. And so like I was saying before, like the original platform before AI is you write templates and components. And so Pulumi, you can just define a class and then use that class everywhere and update it in one place. And like that is actually just as important now, because you want your agent or LLM to just use your existing component and know when to use it. And that way you're still standardizing you have everyone on the same version, and then you can upgrade it. Everyone does it together instead of maintaining all of these ad hoc ways of doing things. But you're doing it in a way that you can still go fast. And so I feel like throughout this conversation, we've been talking about like there's lessons in history that like keep repeating themselves. And like as we kind of go through these new phases, we're like, oh yeah, that was important for a reason. Like let's actually add that back. And you're kind of figuring out in this new mode what's relevant and what's not. But in terms of like advice to people, like what I always tell my team is try out the tools. Like it is amazing. It's one of those technologies where you really have to build an intuition about which use cases are good and which are not. James was saying earlier, like he's excited about the phase of like planning and to do, like that element of things is like just in the frontier where we're starting, where like you might as a developer have a agent that's really good at just thinking, right? So you're like using Opus or one of those models that's great at like deep thinking. And so you go to it first and you're like, okay, let's spec out this change I'm going to do. Then you go to your execution model who's like great at writing code, like Sonnet 4.5 or something. And so like you build that intuition through iteration. And so just play with the tools, like just try using them, try and understand what's good at what. And then you can start to piece them together and build a workflow that hopefully speeds you up, but is also you're not having to correct it the whole time, even though it is still a 3-year-old.
All right. I'll start from the question before we jump to the demo, but we should have enough time for that. So the first question is, Megan, you mentioned that Neo is capable of the like massive updates and the changes, but there is still human in the loop. So how basically Neo address the concerns of this trustworthy true AI partner? And is it really always human in the loop for all use cases? That's one of the questions from our audience.
I think from Pulumi's perspective, I'm curious what James thinks in terms of just like the industry wide. But I think from Pulumi's perspective, where we're at today is like we think a lot of teams want that. Like they want the speed, but they still want review. Just like today, you don't usually merge direct master without a review. And so we expect that to still be the case today. In saying that, there's going to be use cases where you might not need a human in the loop. A good example is you might have a dev environment where you just want to be able to iterate quickly and see where you can get. And I would imagine in the short-term future, you actually just look at the operational metrics of that ephemeral environment and be like, okay, we rolled up to a bigger database size, we simulated the load, and now we're seeing that everything's stable. We feel good about this. Let's roll into staging, testing, production with the human in the loop. So there might be phases of your workflow that you start to just let it run if things are working really well. But I think largely where we expect to be today is that you want that checkbox, you want that review. It's just a teammate. You wouldn't just have one teammate be able to merge directly to main.
Love it. Megan, how do you force LLM to stick to the rules and policies?
I mean, to my point earlier, we just assume it won't. Like I think within building our own agent, we've done a lot to make the quality good. And like, it's really important to us with all of our evals that like our agent can one-shot them so it can get it right away. And so there's, prompt engineering that goes into it. There's the tools that it has and that it knows when to use those tools. So you could imagine things like using an MCP to like look up certain, like for example, cost in AWS. AWS has a cost MCP. Doing things like that. Like, okay, it knows to actually just look up the actual amount instead of guessing a number. But we assume that at points it will fail. And so having the steps where it has to run a clean preview. So you need to run a preview that has that human approval. And then if it isn't able to run a preview, it's just doing that loop on its own behind the scenes of like, I need to go fix this. We use programming languages, so it has to compile all the languages, so it makes sure that there's no errors there. And then lastly, we have policies that stops it from doing anything. That's irrespective of the agent. And so we kind of assume that it's going to make mistakes, and we build for how you actually handle dealing with those mistakes. And so that's where we're at currently. I think it's going to get harder in the future if these models get a lot better and they can just run on their own, then you're going to need to figure out where those guardrails actually sit so that they're not slowing down velocity.
Okay. And I'll take one more question and I'll join Gemma and I'll take the rest. I think this is actually a question for both James and Megan. We can start probably from James and go to the second part about Neo. Are platform and infra teams getting more cross-team collaboration because of AI? And the second question, probably to Megan, seems easier for the backend developers or engineering manager to contribute and collaborate if Neo or coding agents is helping them, right? So James, first of all, do you see more collaboration across the team, developers, platform engineers, security because of AI?
Yes and no. So yes, from the perspective of they're collaborating about AI, like security teams are obviously working with dev teams to saying, hey, what are you guys doing in the AI space? And trying to coach them with like how to build AI or how to use agents effectively, and securely. But I'm also seeing the opposite happen too, right? Because now people no longer have to reach out to other teams, right? Like they can do things on their own because of AI, right? As a developer, a lot of times they have trouble getting visibility into like production workloads. And so in a lot of cases, what they usually have to do is reach out to infrastructure teams to ask them, hey, I need temporary access, or I need logs from this date and time frame for these different systems. Can you provide me access or give me the logs for this? Now they don't have to ask for that, right? Because if as long as an MCP server, or as long as AI has access to that data, they're getting that themselves. So it's actually bringing the data and the resources closer to the teams that need it. And so in some ways, it's actually reducing collaboration, but like I said, in other ways, it's also increasing it. So it's kind of like yes and no.
Megan, what do you see basically in Pulumi customer space maybe? And is it easier for backend developers to contribute and collaborate with platform engineering using Neo?
I mean, it definitely makes collaboration easier. My original reaction was like, no, I don't think so, because to date, I think that where we're at is that these tools make you really good at doing the job you already know how to do. I don't know if they're yet at a place that you can learn a job that you don't know. Like that they could do it for you, I guess is a better way of putting it. And so like infrastructure is still hard. Like there's a lot of challenges for a developer to feel like super comfortable deploying their application into production. Like there is a lot of things you just like need subject matter expertise on. There's usually a lot of nuance in your organization that the LLM isn't trained on. And so my first reaction was no. But I guess the one thing is, first, I totally agree with James that like the data is closer and there's like that data layer that you're interacting on. Like it's easier to get insights on things, and you can have that conversation with your like cross-cutting teams. But I think that learning is easier. And so like, for example, this is like a bit of a tangent example, but it's relevant, is like we've always hired documentation writers at Pulumi that have a lot of like coding experience, because like we write coding examples. But now we can find like amazing people who have self-taught themselves how to program that have actually just a docs writing background. And they like, I think that is a level of collaboration that you haven't seen, and that you can learn a lot of these things. And so the divide is less. In saying that, I still think infrastructure is hard, and it is very hard to, if you're not familiar with it and spending a lot of time to like today just use an AI agent and like figure it all out. There's definitely easier paths to like jump that divide of how much information there is to learn now, but I still think it's hard.
And I probably can add one more observation here is James mentioned that we don't know yet how the right best practices to do AI agents implementation in MCP. So this information actually doesn't exist. And I think actually this one and new guardrails and new best practices in the AI space and agentic workflows will push us to collaborate more between security platform engineering and developers, because that is yet to be created. Thank you so much, Megan and James. Megan, let's look at the Neo and let's look at how it can do things in action.
All right. So upon first look, you can see that Neo asks you, what do you want to do today? Or what do you want today? And our whole experience here is it's just another teammate. So like you would message someone being like, hey, this is what I need to work on. You can do the same with Neo. Some examples that I had already baked up, so on our baking show, you don't have to watch me go through the process, is the one we talked about is upgrading a Lambda Python runtime. And so you can see it created the index.ts file that updates it from 3.8 to 3.11. And then it asked me, like, do you want to run the preview? So this is the approval we talked about of like, okay, I want to actually be able to okay when it's going to go reach out to the cloud provider. And so that's one example. And then I think one that's really interesting when we talked about just understanding architectures is you can have Neo just explain your infrastructure to you, and it can walk through explaining like how everything is done, but it also will draw diagrams. And so you can see specifically really quickly how everything is architected. I thought this was interesting because I'm sure many of us, we've all been there drawing these diagrams, and it just takes time, right? But then Pulumi knows all the relationship across all of your infrastructure. So you can just ask it and it will plot everything for you. Another example I wanted to pull up is, giving it a CVE. We got this email from someone like, hey, the CVE happened. And so like, hey, are we impacted? And so then Neo kind of does an analysis and says like, yep, I found 3 vulnerable Redis instances. Do you want me to upgrade them all? And you can see this plan. Once I okay it, it's written out the plan of how it's going to go across everything, write the remediation, run the preview, and then write the pull request.
Thank you so much, Megan. We're looking forward for more, and I know we have more coming about Neo and different use cases. So please share with us your blogs and keep doing a good job addressing the customer's needs. Any questions, we will stick for a couple of minutes, and please share your use cases or ask questions on what kind of use cases you have where actual infrastructure code agent can help to solve it, or you're not sure if it can help solve it. We are open for any questions now.
James, I think that comment you made about MCP servers are being more than APIs is crazy. Hurts my brain to think about that world.
Yeah, and I definitely agree that people don't think about MCP servers as another actually component, which is still have executable code underneath, and it's no different. It's just use some kind of LLM behind it, may use, right? So we have a question. Actually, we have two more questions. Can you integrate Neo with AWS to monitor resources usage for system capacity review tasks?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways to do this. Pulumi itself has a product called Insights where we connect via OIDC or static credentials, but we recommend OIDC to your AWS account, and we basically slurp everything into Pulumi. Mm-hmm. And so if that's connected, then Neo can look direct at your cloud account and basically tell you anything you want to know about it, open PRs on stuff. If it's going to open a pull request on something that's just in your cloud account but not managed by IAC, how it will do that is import it to IAC and then do that operation, because we are Pulumi and we believe strongly in the benefit of having infrastructure in source control. But that is kind of the workflow today. And so I think part of your question could also be about can you monitor metrics in AWS instead of just the resource existing? And so the second thing is today we don't have that. We are looking at how we can leverage existing tools like the MCP servers AWS has, but probably the AWS CLI. And then we really want to get in data like CloudWatch metrics for Neo to be able to see. And so all of that is going to be configurable. So the organization will be able to choose which tools that they want the agent to have access to. Because some might be yep, sure, you can see all of that data, you can slurp into those metrics, but that might not be everyone. There might be some companies who want a little bit more carefulness around that.
All right, great. So if there is a free trial for Neo.
So Pulumi itself has a trial of 14 days, Pulumi Cloud. And so you can definitely use that. Any organization that, any organization in Pulumi can use Neo right now for free. We haven't added any cost to use Neo because it's in preview. Once we make it generally available, there will be a cost, which is likely going to correlate to the amount of tokens you use. And if you create an organization, you'll have a 14-day trial. But you can also, if you put in a credit card, we have a free tier. So if you're just playing around with it, you can just use it like Neo for free right now as much as you want.
Yeah, I think free trial is important because you can go try yourself quickly. Question from Sergey. Can we create a custom policies? How policies from policies are code imbued into the system? And finally, what teams should come up with an agreement with policies?
This is a really good question. So you can create custom policies. It does depend what SKU you're on in Pulumi Cloud. And so we give everyone a policy out of the box for free on any organization. But in order to have custom policies, you need to be an enterprise or business critical. And custom policies in terms of who writes them, it's really interesting. We have platform teams that author them, and then they'll usually get a review from their security team. Mm-hmm. But we also have teams that their security team writes all of them and owns them. And so it really just depends on how the layout is organizationally in each company. I think for smaller companies, we usually see the infrastructure people write them. But as the company gets larger, they usually offload it into a security team. But it's a really good question that I don't think I've ever been asked. I just talk to customers about what they're doing. So that's what we typically see.
And I share the how to create custom policy packs, the documentation. The next question is when to use Neo, when use local coding edging with Pulumi MCP server, basically how that works right now for customers. Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're only a few weeks out, so we'll see. We're really interested to see how users, what flow that they like using Neo in. But today you can use it inside the UI, like I demoed. or you can use it inside of your existing IDE or terminal using the MCP server. And how we're thinking about it from the conversations we've had so far is usually things that span many repos that might be like a long running task. Like a good example would be like the CVE update I showed, or the Lambda runtimes example. If it's going to be across many repos and you're going to want to open many PRs, you probably want to do that in Pulumi Cloud, because then you can just let it run and you don't need to have the context of all those stacks locally. So you don't need to pull anything down and know that it runs. Pulumi Cloud will have all that. And so that will likely make the most sense. But if you're working locally and wanting to just quickly iterate, the MCP server is going to be really helpful. The MCP server has tools to be able to see the public registry. So you can look up, like, if you're using an AWS resource, what are all the parameters? And the LLM will just be able to grab that, which prevents it from hallucinating and getting it right more quickly. And so if you're just writing IAC code in your IDE, the MCP might feel a little bit more natural because you're just closer to that dev loop. But we imagine that longer running and like wide sweeping changes, you'll want to be able to collaborate with others. You'll want to be able to let that just go, and then you can close your laptop and walk away.
All right, and I know we just announced remote MCP server. I placed the link on that. I actually just became aware of it yesterday. So I think it's for the like engineers who already have a like IDE, something like using QCLI, or maybe already experimenting with the Kira. It's just another MCP server configuration, and you can use Neo inside of MCP server too. And one more, we have two more questions. So, oh, no, one. How long can you run? I have a lot of SOC 2 type and best practices issues that are simple but numerous.
That's a great question. I think right now the limit we've set is 8 hours, just because that's like the most that we've seen get hit. But that is a very long time. I'm sure we will refine that over time. But there are some tasks that we've given Neo that are massive and take a long time and require a lot of deep thinking and then swapping over to like writing the PRs. And so I think at the moment it can run for quite a while. In saying that, if the workflow is I want to fix a lot of policy violations, I could imagine there's some benefit to splitting that out to multiple tasks, which is like just like readability of being able to, if you're going to generate a lot of PRs, be able to see, okay, this type of violation has these PRs instead of trying to do it all at once. But doing bulk operations is something that we want to support in Neo, and works today, but we'll be making it better over time.
Right. Looking forward to that. I think it's like the last trend of what I see is like you don't want one agent, because agent can like run in parallel and do some of the tasks. You want to actually talk to separate agent in a parallel and execute like some different task, and probably maybe provide different prompt to solve the same problem, the complex one. We have one more. Are there really okay? So that's interesting, James. It's probably for you too.
Yeah.
Are
Yeah,
there really
I see the question.
A to A? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. There are
That's
definitely use cases for A to A. So MCP server is great if you have like an MCP client, like you're using an application such as, like Cursor, Kiro, QCLI, where you implement it. But if you have a use case where you have agents that need to talk to other agents, that's where you're going to use A to A, right? And so when I'm thinking of agents talking to other agents is like, let's just say like Neo as an example might have like, they have agentic capabilities, and their agent actually needs to talk to another agent to do like a subtask. Like to talk to maybe an AWS agent that does the actual infrastructure deployment, then yes, then you'd use A to A. So yes, there's actually some really good use cases, but it's not a binary decision. Like you can use both, right? You should, and in most cases you probably would, right? You'd have MCP and you'd also have A to A. So it wouldn't be a choose either MCP or A to A.
Megan, did you already hear from Pulumi customers for A to A use cases, and what they're asking is maybe any specific like other agents integrations?
Yeah, I think some of the things that has actually come up the most are some of our customers have built their own agents. And so inside their environment, with their environment context. And so they're like, oh, there's some things I would want to hand out to Neo, but also I want to know when that's done, and then I can carry it forward. And so that's been interesting, because it's like there's no documentation how we would integrate with that, right? Like it's all this is very new in terms of standardization. But I totally agree with James. Like I could imagine with Pulumi, you might want to use any of like AWS's things. You might want to use like Sentry has an agent called Seer. like Datadog in the future, I'm sure we'll have things and say like, okay, we just did all these things in Pulumi. I want to make sure that I put all that data into Datadog so that I have a history of it. I'm just going to go talk to that agent. Like there's a lot of, the ecosystem is large in infrastructure. And so the importance of integrating across with data specifically is important. So I can definitely see a lot of use cases. And that's, I think, what we've heard so far.
Right. Definitely looking forward. I definitely wanted to communicate to one agent and don't split myself between multiple. But currently we're in the area when we still want to human check every single agent. So agent to agent probably very, very raw now, like on the vibe level for now. I agree with that. That's what we see is that's why probably we like maturity of the agents right now is like, okay, let's try the agents and let's try to adopt it and see how it works before we actually jump in to give us like autonomous decisions which one agent you have to delegate the task. Is James, Megan, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean that's a very true statement, right? Like there's still humans in the loop, but then where I find that agents are going to work out really well is think of them as being able to like being experts at subtasks. Like let's say you have a like a research paper to write. You have a research agent that actually goes out there, collects the data. You have another research agent that then can consolidate that data and then put it into bits of information that you actually need. And then you have another agent that do I have my dogs barking? Then you have another agent that can actually consolidate that all into a report. But a human will still review the output.
Yeah, Doug. I think Doug just agreed.
I think they did too.
Doug agents.
I was just going to say, I think it's interesting thinking about like we write evals for our agents, and it would be interesting thinking about you probably want to write evals for other agents, because if I'm integrating with some external agent and they change their format of how they return data or like something that changes our interface, we would want to make sure that we're checking on that. And so it is interesting thinking about like, yeah, we're in the vibe era, but to get to the like actually using this and relying on it, what are the gates that you would need in place to ensure that you have stability?
Yeah, and Megan also mentioned something earlier too, where she was talking about using specific like models, using them for what they're good at, and that's actually a really good use case to use like different agents, right? So you have an agent that actually does the design and planning, and a different model that then, which is also a different agent that then does the actual coding, right? And so yeah, and that's a use case for A to A, right? The end result will still go to a human in the loop that'll actually review all of that, but here is where you're actually like breaking apart the problem into different tasks that then that you're assigning to different models or agents, if you will.
Great, thank you so much. I think at this note is I probably like call it as a great conversation. Thank you, Megan and James, for your insights, and we're looking forward for new features and agent to agent integration between Pulumi and AWS. Thank you both. Thank you, our audience, for attending, and have the great rest of the day. Thank you so much.